Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today will be Chris Rossini, who helps me out on this program called Mythbusters. Chris is the editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. And Chris, welcome to the program today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Great to be on the show again. Thank you.
You know, we talk about what goes on in politics and in the economy based on misconceptions and misunderstandings and myths that exist, and yet it has a lot to do with policy. And it seems that as you and I look around, we find so many of these flaws in the understanding right smack dab in a very important event going on, and that's the presidential campaign. So it looks like today we're going to be talking about misconceptions and myths floating around, and we hear them being talked about and acted upon by the politicians in the debates. What do we have for today?
Yes, well, today we're going to start off with propaganda. And unfortunately, propaganda works, and it's used all the time. In fact, we could go all the way back to Nazi Germany and their minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, who said that if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people eventually come to believe it. Well, those that watched the Republican debate a few days ago noticed the propaganda for war and terrorism was over the top. You had people like Trump and talking about recently killing families, and they talk about killing children as if it's it's just a part of the conversation. And Trump says how he's so militant, and he's the biggest militant of them all. Is it any surprise that Gallup released a poll, and it shows that America's number one top U.S. problem is the fear of terrorism? Should we be surprised about this, Dr. Paul?
No, we shouldn't be. We should be very disappointed, and we should understand it very clearly how powerful propaganda is. We certainly know in recent history, even before the Persian Gulf War and the Iraq War, the propagandists were very, very busy. And unfortunately, the politicians chime in. They're part of the establishment that is pro-war. And then there's also the media that, whether it's right-wing or left-wing, they're all in support of the military-industrial complex. But you know, there's a lot of people right now thinking about Donald Trump being an answer to some of these problems, and I think they're misled on this, because Donald Trump is actually wants more militarism. He thinks our military has been decimated, and he wants to spend a lot more money on the military, so he's part of this propaganda. So the propagandists counteract good instincts and common sense, because usually if you take a poll of the American people, whether it's before the Persian Gulf War, the Iraq War, and even the things going on in Syria, they always say no, 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 and then they get converted. Even though right now our policies are failing in Syria and we're backing off, the people are still chanting, you know, we have to go, drop more bombs. So the propagandists are very, very powerful. And unfortunately, the American people get very gullible, and they have to have the people fearful. But my biggest gripe, it's so out of proportion to the real fear. And once you say that, you say, you mean you don't care about terrorism? You don't care about people being killed at colleges and different things like that? Sure, I care. But they want to terrorize and expand the militarism and spend more money, which in many ways is the cause of terrorism because of the blowback and the unintended consequences. So they never ask, you know, why do people want to come and kill, and why do they hate our guts? And as long as they do that, the propagandists are going to win. And I always had hoped that the internet would get the truth out, and to a large degree, many of us are able to do that. But really, the propagandists are on stages, you know, in the major networks where they put all the politicians out there chanting for expansion of war. So I would say the propagandists are winning, the people are losing, and along with it, we lose our liberties as well, and we don't have a stronger national defense, and that's the real tragedy. And I think it's very important that people don't think that Donald Trump is any different than the rest. And there's only one person on that stage that even hints that maybe we're doing way too much, and that, of course, is some individual related to me. But when it comes to Donald Trump, he's just more of the same, more spending, and more provoking. He actually believes that killing families shouldn't be considered anything other than a proper act of war. We're at war with these people, so the families are justified targets. That is way over the top. We need to stop the propaganda and seek out truth.
Yes, and unfortunately, when we go to the other side of the aisle, it's not much better. The propaganda for terrorism opens up opportunities for opportunists like Hillary Clinton, who recently tried to link terrorism and gun control. She basically wants to kill two birds with one stone by linking the two and using it to take away guns from 300 million Americans, not the U.S. government, of course, but from all of us. And she says, I have news for Republicans. Terrorists use guns to kill Americans. I think we should make it harder for them to do that. What do you think about Hillary?
Well, guns are always at fault, and the left thinks if you just take away the guns from law-abiding citizens, somehow that's going to happen. So she wants to attack liberty, and once again, she doesn't ask the question of why we're in trouble. But your point that you were alluding to, that even the Democrats talk this way, there is way too much bipartisanship in Washington, whether it's the welfare state or the warfare state and militarism. And I've always complained that the biggest problem is the compromise and the getting along together. And we just saw that recently in the budget. So she's no different than the West, than the rest of them. She could run as a Republican and might do quite well because she's so militaristic. And yet, the people, saying they don't pay a whole lot of attention, and so many on her side. And right now, they've been able to gain back again the anti-gun people, but she claims that the guns are the problems, which is absolutely false. Freedom to defend oneself is hardly something that has to be attacked and will have something to do with reducing the threat of terrorism. And once again, you won't be able to do that unless you understand the flawed foreign policy that we follow.
Right, and that flawed foreign policy has much, if not all, to do with the U.S. government seeking to put its leaders or compliant leaders in different places around the world. One is Syria, and this has been going on for many years, and it's been reported that the plans go back all the way to 9/11 with Syria. And after 250,000 dead people and financing terrorists and terrorist organizations like ISIS cropping up, John Kerry, Secretary of State, said something this week which I don't believe, and I'd like to know what your opinion is. But all of a sudden he says the United States and its partners are not seeking regime change in Syria. Do you believe this, Dr. Paul?
Well, I'll qualify what he said if you want to try to believe it, and that is he's changed his mind, because we're losing the war. It's a total failure, and Russia has had a policy over there that really mocked us and ridiculed what we have done because they went in there to fight ISIS, and we don't fight ISIS. We pretend we do, but ISIS actually is anti-Assad, and we thought ISIS would help get rid of Assad. So all of a sudden, yeah. But the fact that he sort of alludes to the fact that we never really wanted to. Yes, we declared war. It's been going on. It's been a civil war, but the expansion of the war was radically changed in 2011 when our president said Assad has to go. And though at times we always had hoped that Obama would be more in favor of less war and more peace and negotiation, he was just as bad as the neocons, and maybe worse because he lulls the progressives to sleep and figured, oh, if Obama's doing it, it must be okay. But for him to think that all of a sudden, oh no, we really didn't want Assad, he doesn't have to go. But it's in a way encouraging, even if he is acting on a lie, he's doing this, he flip-flops and he does it with a straight face. It means that the policy that we have, that we predicted would fail, is failing, and they have to change it. And that, I think, is very good. But right now, there's a lot of warmongering going on, and the Congress basically voted more money just recently for the military, bipartisan-wise. So it's going to continue, but in this way, it's sort of a shame. When we used to lose fights and battles in Vietnam, we would just send thousands, and we ended up with 500,000 troops over there and couldn't beat a third world nation. So this is what will happen. They'll keep saying more and more and more, and how much more damage and how many other more people have to be killed before we say it's a flawed policy, has nothing to do with national defense. It's failing. It's time to get out. It's time to move out of not only Syria, but all those wars that we're involved in the Middle East. We should be talking about more free trade and more travel and acting more peacefully, because when we go in and want to dictate who wants to run these countries, believe me, there's a heavy cost to us. And one of the worst costs is the fact that when there's retaliation, such as 9/11, then our government attacks the liberties of the American people. So it's time to change our tune in foreign policy.
Right. And finally, Dr. Paul, let's leave something for our viewers to think about in this show about propaganda. And I think personally, it's not unreasonable to think that if King James III were alive today, King James, who we had the American Revolution from, if he were alive today and saw the powers that the United States government, and specifically the powers that the president has, I would think that his jaw would drop. However, we have people like Governor Mike Huckabee, who wants to keep Americans, he wants them to remain in their second grade desks from their government schools. And he says, our system is not a system of tyranny. We don't elect kings, we elect servants. Is that true, Dr. Paul?
Well, that's not just a myth. That's a joke. You know, what is he talking about? How many American people are probably with us on this one, because and they might complain they're not servants and they want them to be, but not many American people believe the people in Washington are servants, and rightfully so. They shouldn't be. They should be protectors of liberty, and they shouldn't be people interfering in the affairs of other nations or interfering in our personal lives. So that is so much different. But you know, whether you have elected leaders or a king, you can have a benevolent king, and there have been periods of time when things aren't too bad. Because you know, whether you have a king or an elected leadership, they survive because of a prevailing attitude. The people have to support them. Things can get pretty tough, and the bad guys get thrown out. But you know, they didn't have elected leaders in the Soviet Union, but finally they were routed after many, many tragedies. But they only exist because the people support them. So there's a lot of people that did support communism. A lot of people supported Nazism and fascism. And that is what has to change. So it isn't this idea, oh, we have elections, we elect leaders, we instruct them, they serve the people, and everything will be okay. No. Tyranny comes in all forms and colors, and some of the most vicious it comes from people who are benevolent and say, I am going to take care of you, I'm going to feed you and protect you. They are the worst kind, because they disarm everybody and say, oh no, we got to give up our freedom. They will feed me, they will take care of me, they will protect me, and they will protect me from the people who want to harm me, and that nobody will come into this country and drop bombs on us. And they succumb to this, and that, of course, is a very dangerous position, because we become dependent in the sacrifice of liberty. So we have a king in Washington, and the kings are just rotated, but they're all controlled by the same group of people, the people who believe in the militarism, the military-industrial complex, the interventionist foreign policy, and all the nonsense that gave us this. Economic policy is endorsed by both sides. Deficits don't matter, and we're nearing the final stage of that philosophy. Just as communism entered the final stages in 1989, we now are facing a point where interventionism worldwide is failing. Central banking, inflationism, and debt. Failed policies, and that's why we should be very prepared for rocky times. As the economic times get rocky and the political terms get rocky, liberty gets threatened, and then that will be a big contest between those of us who want to get rid of the king and the process of the king, even if they're elected, and those of us who believe in and understand what true liberty is all about. Of course, everybody knows where I stand. And Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you again, Dr. Paul.
Good, and I want to thank our audience for tuning in to the Liberty Report and this program called Mythbusters. And please come back soon.